We're getting breaking news. The Supreme Court appointed Lodha panel has submitted its report on the implementation of the reforms suggested by the panel. The panel has slammed the BCCI in the court, saying that the BCCI is stalling reforms and is not open to changes. Now, these are very scathing remarks coming in from the Lodha panel, because what they have said is that an ouster of the entire top brass of the BCCI is necessary, because the Lodha panel believes that it is the top brass of the BCCI that is stalling reforms and is not open to change. They have asked for directions with respect to accounting selectors, which have been ignored, is what they are saying. The BCCI is to conduct an AGM to consider the changes in rules directed by the Supreme Court. Consulting editor Boria Majumdar is now joining us with more details. Boria, very scathing remarks there by the Lodha panel to the Supreme Court, saying that it wants an ouster of the entire top brass of the BCCI because they are stalling the reforms suggested by them.
And his entire team at the Moria Hotel, when they had that meeting and had a fairly longish discussion, this is on the cards. I mean, BCCI in that AGM of theirs on the 21st of September went ahead with the secretary's election, went ahead with the appointment of 5 senators, and most importantly, they have not moved at all with respect to constitutional amendments. The deadline given was 30th of September. They have called an SGM on the 30th to deliberate on the reforms, not implement the reforms. So clearly the Lodha panel is mixed, and these scathing comments in that status report which they have submitted to the Supreme Court is not surprising at all. Question is, what will the BCCI say on October 6th? Will they implement the reforms, or will they say anything else? Because it is now coming to that crux where they might well be pulled up for contempt of court.
All right, let's get in a word quickly from Anusha Soni, getting us the very latest from the Apex Court. Anusha, with the Lodha panel making such scathing remarks against the BCCI, saying that it is not willing to change or accept the reforms suggested by the Lodha panel, has the court made any observations or remarks today?
Maha, clearly there are some very scathing observations which are coming from the Apex Court. The Chief Justice of India himself during this matter has said that BCCI cannot be a law unto itself, and it must fall in line and implement the reforms suggested by the Lodha Committee, or the Supreme Court will ensure the compliance of its orders. The court also very sarcastically commented that it was anticipating this sort of behavior and attitude by the BCCI. Clearly, what comes as a major setback to the Board of Cricket Control in India is the fact that the Lodha panel has made some very scathing comments about the top brass of the BCCI, and even said that the court must take actions against the top officials. And the Chief Justice of India, T.S. Thakur, was clearly urged by all these submissions of the Lodha Committee. And on 6th of October, we are clearly, to see some action as far as the Lodha panel report is concerned.
Stay with us, Anusha. Let's also get in a word from consulting editor Rajdeep Sardesai. Rajdeep, can the BCCI choose not to implement the recommendations of the Lodha panel when it's coming all the way from the Apex Court directly?
Well, as we've seen only last week, the Karnataka government also virtually defied the Supreme Court when it came to the Kaveri waters issue. And now you've got a situation where essentially the BCCI, the sense one gets, is trying to buy time, is trying to create a confrontational situation and buy time at least till the winter session of Parliament in November, where a section of the BCCI, which is closely linked to the ruling government, would hope that the Parliament passes a bill which makes the BCCI, in a sense, autonomous of any control from the Lodha Committee panel report. I think that is the aim of the BCCI. Can we stretch this up to November and then put enough pressure by passing some kind of a parliamentary legislation or a sports bill that essentially makes the BCCI almost unaccountable to the recommendations of the Lodha panel? But a conflict is clearly brewing, and the BCCI is now going to find itself in a very, very difficult position vis-a-vis the Supreme Court, at least for now.
Okay, former cricketer Nikhil Chopra is also now joining us with his perspective on the story. Nikhil, was something of this nature expected from the BCCI, considering that it's a very powerful cricketing body?
They are a powerful cricketing body, but they cannot also be above the law. I think a certain amount of recommendations, had they sat down and spoken to them, things could have been sorted out. And I personally feel that as well, with the 3 selection member point and also no as in between overs, that's your major revenue generation. So I guess somebody had to sit down with the Lodha committee and trying to, find a middle way that you cannot stop associations or a cricket control board's revenue generation. And don't forget, you've got 28 state teams playing Ranji Trophy. 3-man member selection committee will not be the easiest. At the end of the day, all matches, every single ball needs to get covered as well. Mm-hmm. So there are certain points, yes, in terms of transparency, I think the BCCI is going about their job trying to make sure that they become more transparent. But certain amount of issues that the recommendations were given by Lodha, they'll find it very, very difficult to implement.
All right, let me go back once again to Anusha, because Anusha, I want to understand from you as to whether, the BCCI has given any sort of time frame by which it will start looking at these reforms. And, what exactly are the reforms as suggested by Lodha panel, which it is not willing to implement, which it is resisting?
Well, Maha, as far as the timelines are concerned, we must keep into mind that the Lodha panel has very clearly outlined the time frame.
All right, Anusha, just hold on to your thoughts for a second. Justice Lodha is now joining us on the phone line, sir. The Lodha panel, headed by you, tells the Supreme Court that the BCCI is not willing to implement the reforms suggested by the panel. Are there any specific changes that the BCCI is particularly resisting?
No changes, we don't know. We are bound by the Supreme Court judgment. Supreme Court has accepted our recommendations, and to the extent that that has been accepted, we have been asked to ensure that they are complied with. So our task is limited as per the Supreme Court judgment to do two things. One, to draw the timelines for the implementation of the recommendation, and 2, to supervise the implementation. And that's how we did. First, we have drawn the timelines, handed it over to BCCI, and we have found that some of the actions which have been taken, they are not consistent with the recommendations, and therefore there are violations.
Justice
Supreme
Lodha,
Court gave us liberty that should there be any impediment in implementation of the recommendations, the same may be brought to the notice of the Supreme Court by way of status report. So we have followed that route and informed the court about the impediments.
Justice Lodha, by not willing to take in the reform suggested by the panel that you were heading, it is the BCCI is defying, in a sense, what the apex court is asking it to do. Under these circumstances, what are the possibilities?
No possibilities. We have prayed that the present dispensation be superseded and panel of administrators be appointed until the reforms are carried out and everything takes place.
Justice Lodha, has the court said anything to that recommendation that the entire top brass be removed of the BCCI so that the reforms can kick in?
We have said to supersede the present office bearers and in their place appoint panel of administrators. That's what our prayer to the court is.
Boria Majumdar wants to come in at this point. Boria, go ahead.
Justice Lodha, thank you for speaking to us. 2 questions. One, what is your recommendation with respect to the state associations? Because in your report, it was clearly said that by 30th September, they will have to implement the constitutional amendments. But if I understand right, except Vidarbha and a couple of associations who have written into you, Hyderabad and Uttar Pradesh, no other association has responded. What is your response to that?
This report, we have confined actually our observations to the BCCI's acts and omissions and commissions. We have made it very clear in the report that as regards state associations, should need arise, we will submit a separate status report.
So my second question is, when you said you have recommended a panel of administrators, have you taken names, and do you expect on the 6th of October the Supreme Court to pass an order on these lines, given that the BCCI is doing an SGM on the 30th and will come up with its version of the story on the 6th?
Sorry, we have requested the court to pass an order, whatever is deemed fit. We have prayed that the present administrators, present office bearers be superseded and panel of administrators be appointed. We have not recommended anything. It's for the court to decide who are the best persons and whether there is any such necessity or not. All these decisions will be taken by the Supreme Court.
Justice Lodha, 3 former cricketers have come out saying dialogue is the way forward and perhaps the recommendations are harsh. Ravi Shastri, Sunil Gavaskar, Kapil Dev. Is there any more scope for dialogue, or now that has ended and it is now only a matter of time before the court passes this order superseding the present dispensation?
Look, when we submitted the report, there were recommendations. Then BCCI had full opportunity to oppose those recommendations, which they did. And hearing continued for months together. It was thereafter that the Supreme Court has accepted what they thought must be accepted, and on a couple of things where Supreme Court had reservations, they did not. Now, our report has merged into the Supreme Court judgment, and we are enforcing the judgment of the Supreme Court. Now, for your information, of course, of these 3, we did have interaction with Kapil Dev before we submitted the report. We had interacted with 5 other former captains like Sachin Tendulkar, Saurav Ganguly, Rahul Dravid, Anil Kumble, Bishan Singh Bedi, large number of other players like, Javgal Srinath, Venkatesh Prasad, Mohinder Nath. It's not that everyone had the same view. We had consulted all office bearers of BCCI, right from Jagmohan Dalmia to Shashank Manohar to Mr. Aniruddha Thakur, Mr. Ajay Shirke, and large number, and also lots many other people. And then we recommended what we thought was good for the administration of cricket. And then every recommendation has been considered by the Supreme Court after hearing BCCI. They had full say. Now, if these 3 gentlemen have their views, they're most welcome. They are well-known players. They have understanding of cricket. But now what we have to do is to implement the Supreme Court judgment. It's not that we are, this is adversarial form of litigation where BCCI is fighting against the committee or committees. And there's nothing like that. We are doing a simple job. What court would have done, court assigned to the committee, and we are only discharging the brief which has been given by the Supreme Court. Nothing more, nothing less.
Sir, final question from me. Are you aware that the BCCI is stalling it, assuming that in the winter session of Parliament they will try to move up an ordinance or a bill whereby we can sort of be autonomous and perhaps not have to implement the Lodha reforms? A section of the BCCI is from the ruling party of this country. Are you aware of that attempt by the BCCI?
I don't have any authentic news, but Parliament will do its job. It's ultimately the highest law-making body of the country. Absolutely, what they do, they think is right, and we all must respect Parliament's business. I don't have to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Justice Lodha, I want to ask you a final question before I let you go. Are there any specific areas where the BCCI is particularly resisting change? All right, we seem to have lost that link there. Justice Lodha was speaking exclusively with India Today, telling us about how the BCCI is ignoring the recommendations by the Lodha panel. This has been told to the Supreme Court today, and the Supreme Court is likely to pass an order later on this front. Boria is still with us, along with Anusha Soni, getting us the very latest from the Apex Court. Boria, what sense do you get from what Justice Lodha just spoke to India Today about? Is there any possibility of a middle path at this juncture?
No, there is no possibility of any middle path at this juncture, and he said that very clearly when I asked him about the question of dialogue. Let me try and answer the question that you were trying to pose to Justice Lodha from my deliberations with the Lodha committee over the last few days. I've been speaking to them on a fairly regular basis. The one thing that they now realize is that the BCCI top brass wants to hold on to power. And they feel that by trying to hold on to power, these guys are resisting reforms, and this includes the President Anurag Thakur, this includes the Secretary Ajay Shirke, and some of the other top brass. That is what they feel that by trying, because each of them stand disqualified. The most important clause at this point in time is each of these office bearers, the president, the secretary, practically 31 people, if I understand right, stand disqualified from holding office in the BCCI the moment this new constitution, which has been drafted by the Lodha committee, is adopted.
Okay.
Which means they are practically out of the cricket administration structure for the next 3 years, some of them forever. That is what the Lodha committee thinks. They are resisting and trying to hold on to power.
Big story coming in here. The Lodha panel has told the Supreme Court that the BCCI is stalling reforms, is not open to change, and has sought the ouster of the entire top brass of the BCCI. Anusha Soni there getting us the very latest, and many thanks to Boria Majumdar for putting that entire story into perspective.